So one of the things that Roland and I think, Roland, we were talking about before we came, actually, because methods is always this messy thing, because there's a part of it where you did it. So you could just write that up. Sorry, I have some kind of froggy throat today. But your methods really, there's many layers to it. So Roland introduced qualitative, quantitative, and mixed, right? So you're going to fall in one of those camps because that pretty much covers everything. Once you're in one of those bodies, those areas, there's a whole literature base around those areas. There's lots of different methodologies that would be connected to those areas. So, for example, if you think of qualitative, and there are so many different methodologies you could use to do your research. One of the ones that I use quite a bit, and Roland has mentioned it already, is case study, right? Because I am not about, with the small populations I'm dealing with, I'm not about to be able to say, okay, this applies to everybody. This is the best research ever. No, I don't have enough data. I don't have enough validity within my data and reliability built in to make that kind of a statement. So case study as a methodology recognizes that. Now, case studies can also be big. One of the links I put in, I think the online learning course actually, Tony Bates, I mean, they've done a collection of case studies. There's an Italian case study that was quite extensive. So it's not a size thing. It's the orientation and philosophy and approach. So within each of those big buckets, qualitative, quantitative, mixed, there's a bunch of methodologies that you can pick from. And that should really be dictated by your research question, by the theoretical framework, by what you're intending to do. You don't just randomly say, okay, well, you know, I'm going to choose this. You need to look at all of the different pieces of your research project and really make sure that that methodology you're using is a fit. So I won't go down this track too far, but often what happens is people do initial reading of the different methodologies and they think, oh, I'm going to do grounded theory, because the theory emerges from the data, and that's what's going to happen in my research. It's going to emerge from the data. But grounded theory as a method, I knew you'd laugh. Grounded theory as a methodology takes much, you need like longitudinal case study. You need lots of long data over time, repeated data. And so that's not a methodology that I would recommend for any of you, because you need to get this done by next April. So right there, you can take one off your list. So you'll need to spend some time looking at the different methodologies, which are different. This is where it gets confusing. Different than the data collection methods. So you've got your big three buckets. You pick one of those buckets. Within those buckets, there's some methodologies, some ways of approaching research that you can choose. Case study, ethnography, criterion reference testing, all kinds of different ways you can choose. Once you got that sorted out, then there are different ways you can collect the data, different methods you use to collect the data. So it might be a survey, it might be a lit review, it might be a metasynthesis, it might be an interview, it might be focus groups. Each of those data collection methods has their own body of research about how do you create good interview questions, how do you create a good interview protocol, what types of interviewing are you going to do? Is there going to be more than one interviewer? Then you've got some inter-rater reliability issues you need to talk about. So as you think of it, you can kind of think of it as zooming in, right? As you zoom a bit lower and a bit lower and a bit lower, each of the components also has their own body of literature that you're going to want to take a look at to make sure that it's a fit for the study that you're about to do. Joel, you have your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, this is great. My mind's racing, which I think is a good thing. I was just wondering, like, it's interesting because some of the articles that I've been reading already, there seems to be a reoccurring method of research that's happening within that, under that thing, I'll call it, that piece of research. Will that, or can that influence us, or should we let it influence us? Like, should we say, well, those 10 people who are doing that, I think I should maybe do that too, or do you know what I mean? Or just looking at it from an early step.
You really, I mean, absolutely, it's going to influence you. You're thinking about it already, right? But you really need to go back to what, in my study, what am I looking at? What is my little tiny scope and frame of reference? And is that a fit for that type of methodology, that type of approach? It may be, and then of course you have to, justify why you chose it and all that kind of stuff. Or when you look at it, you may think, actually, yeah, no, their scope was very different than what mine is, or their intention in their research questions was very different than mine. So I don't think it's necessarily a crossover.
The important point here is that you got to keep in mind that the focus of a particular piece of research is always going to be contextually bound. That is, using the terminology that I've used in some of my courses before, it's situated. That is, you need to look at the context. You need to look at the population that you are dealing with, and you need to make decisions about the kinds of methods that you are going to be using that are consistent with that population, with the methodology that you want to employ, etc. And you might talk about, or you might think that I'm talking circularly, and yes, I am. There's an iterative kind of process to this. So take a look at the population that you're dealing with, take a look at the methodology that you're dealing with, and then modify both the methodology to fit the population as well as how you actually are conceiving about all of this to fit the two of those things together. So you're actually going to be changing your thinking as you're going through the process. And if you think about it, that's exactly what we're supposed to do. I mean, if we weren't asking the questions, then we wouldn't go looking for the answers. But is the answer actually going to be visible to us? No. Chances are we're going to end up with more questions as a result of the research that we're actually doing, which is exactly what's happening, because that's informing ourselves. If we come up with all the answers, well, there's no point in doing the research.
That is a really important point, and it's something to remember when you're writing. And I saw this in some of what was submitted. There's a tendency to write what you think they should do. I'm just going to tell you what to do. And, it's fantastic. Consultants can do that, and sometimes they get paid for it, and sometimes they get slapped on the wrist, and sometimes they don't do it very well at all, and they shouldn't do it. In my opinion, they shouldn't do it, but some do. That's not what research is about. Research is not about telling people what to do. Research is about investigating. It's about looking. It's about trying to discover. It's about being willing to suspend your belief that something should happen the way you think it is and see what the data tells you, right? That's why you're collecting data. You're collecting data to find out. You think you know what should happen. You think you know how the system works. You think you know how to make it better. That's great. What does the literature say? And then, more importantly, what did your data say? And if you don't let the data speak, then in my opinion, it does a huge disservice to the research itself, because you've asked people, in most cases it's people we're dealing with, to take time out of their lives to comment on something, to share their experience, to share their viewpoint, to share their lens. You've taken time out of your life to research this particular piece, whether it's observational or it's a metasynthesis. So you do need to honor and let that data speak and share that message back in a way that isn't, and now I'm going to tell you what you should do. So I think that's a really important point, and it's a really important thing to watch in your writing. We all do it. I do way too much because you get in the groove and, you can solve the system and you've done all this reading and you've done this research and, other people just don't know because they haven't been in this context like you have. And all of that is true. But when you're writing and reporting out, you really need to ground it in the data first, literature second, and then maybe at the end, if you want to leave a little dig, you can put in a little bit of your own opinion. But it's got to be grounded in something. It can't just be randomly thrown out there. Exactly, Roland. What Roland put in the chat is exactly it. Joel, I think you had your hand up, and I kept talking. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, no, it's interesting. I think maybe it would be easy to take on the stance. We're going to win this. It's like it's not about winning or proving a point. Discovery along. The way, and as you said, I think it really made sense to sort of hit home for me is letting yourself be willing to be disproven, even, or to look at the research and look at the data and say, wow, this took me a year to talk